At 4:23 a.m. on June 17, 1944, Private First Class Thomas Garrett crouched in a hedgerow near Corentin, France, watching a Panzer IV tank idle 40 yards away in the morning mist. He was 21 years old. 11 days past D-Day, 0 tanks destroyed. The German tank was blocking the road his battalion needed to advance through. Garrett had been issued a sticky bomb, officially designated the M1A1 Grenade anti-tank. British design, adopted by the U.S. Army in 1943. The weapon was simple in concept. A glass sphere filled with nitrogen explosive, covered in an adhesive compound, with a 5-second fuse. The idea was to run up to an enemy tank, slap the sticky bomb against the armor, pull the pin, run away, and hope the explosion penetrated. The problem was the sticky bomb didn't stick. Not reliably. The adhesive compound was designed to work on clean, dry metal surfaces. Tank armor in Normandy was covered in mud, dust, grease, and rain. The bombs slid off or fell off before the fuse could detonate. In the 11 days since D-Day, Garrett's battalion had lost 14 men trying to use sticky bombs against German armor. 14 soldiers who ran at tanks with weapons that were supposed to stick but didn't. They got close enough to place the bombs, pulled the pins, started running, and watched the bombs slide off the tank and detonate harmlessly on the ground. Then the tank's machine gunner killed them. The first man Garrett lost was Corporal James Sullivan. June 9, 1944, 3 days after landing at Utah Beach. Sullivan was from Boston, tough kid, volunteered for anti-tank duty. His squad engaged a Panzer IV near Saint-Cum-du-Mont. Sullivan got within 15 feet of the tank, placed his sticky bomb on the side armor, pulled the pin, started running. The bomb slid off, fell to the ground, exploded 8 feet from the tank. Did no damage. The tank's bow machine gunner saw Sullivan running and cut him down with MG-42 fire. Sullivan died in the mud 20 feet from a tank he should have destroyed. The second man was Private Eddie Martinez. June 12. Martinez was from Texas, 19 years old, married 3 months before shipping out. His team tried to stop a Panzer IV that was supporting German infantry near Corentin. Martinez approached from the tank's blind spot, placed his sticky bomb on the rear engine deck, pulled the pin, dove into a ditch. The bomb didn't stick to the greasy engine cover. It rolled off, exploded next to the tank. The blast damaged one of the tank's tracks, but didn't disable it. The tank pivoted on its good track, brought its machine gun to bear, killed Martinez and 2 other soldiers in the ditch. By mid-June, every soldier in Garrett's battalion knew the sticky bombs were unreliable. The weapons worked in training on clean metal test targets. They didn't work in combat on dirty, wet tanks. But command kept issuing them. Keep trying, they said. Get closer. Place them more carefully. The problem wasn't technique. The problem was the adhesive couldn't bond to contaminated surfaces. Garrett studied the problem for 3 days. He watched how the bombs behaved when placed on tanks. The adhesive made contact, seemed to stick for a moment, then failed as the bomb's weight pulled it away from the curved tank armor. The adhesive needed something to grip, something with texture that would hold the bomb in place long enough for the fuse to detonate. On the evening of June 16th, Garrett was changing his socks in his foxhole. Standard wool infantry socks, U.S. Army issue. He noticed how the wool fabric gripped his hand when he held it. Rough texture, lots of surface area. He realized wool might give the sticky bombs adhesive something to grip. The idea was insane. Wrapping a grenade in a sock. Completely unauthorized. But Martinez was dead, Sullivan was dead, 14 men were dead, and Garrett's battalion had orders to clear German armor from the roads around Corentin. Either he found a way to make the sticky bombs work, or more men would die running at tanks with weapons that failed. Garrett worked alone that night. His squad was dug in along a hedgerow 200 yards from the German lines. The night was quiet except for occasional artillery fire in the distance. Rain had fallen all evening. Everything was wet. Garrett pulled a sticky bomb from his pack. The weapon was about the size of a softball, maybe 5 inches in diameter, covered in the brown adhesive compound. He also pulled out a spare sock from his pack. Wool olive drab, standard issue. He stretched the sock over the sticky bomb, pulling it tight around the glass sphere. The wool covered the entire adhesive surface. Garrett pressed the wrapped bomb against the metal frame of his entrenching tool, testing whether the adhesive would grip through the fabric. It did. The adhesive soaked into the wool fibers, bonded with the fabric, created a textured surface that gripped metal much better than the smooth adhesive alone. Garrett pulled the bomb away from the entrenching tool. It required significant force to separate them. The bond was strong. He tested it again, pressing the sock-wrapped bomb against his rifle, then against his helmet. Each time, the bond held firm. The wool gave the adhesive something to grip. The fabric's rough texture increased the surface area, created friction, held the bomb in place. This might work. This might actually work. But testing it on small objects in a foxhole wasn't the same as testing it on a moving tank in combat. Garrett needed to know if the sock would hold the bomb on tank armor long enough for the 5-second fuse to detonate. At 4:23 a.m. on June 17th, Garrett's chance came. A Panzer IV had positioned itself 40 yards from his squad's position, partially concealed by a hedgerow. The tank was blocking the road. German infantry was using it as a rally point. Garrett's lieutenant, a young officer named Morrison from Virginia, called for volunteers to take out the tank with sticky bombs. Nobody volunteered. Everyone had seen what happened to Sullivan and Martinez. The bombs didn't work. Suicide mission. Garrett spoke up, said he had a way to make the bombs stick. Morrison asked what he meant. Garrett showed him the sock-wrapped sticky bomb, explained the theory. Morrison looked at it for a long moment, then asked if Garrett had tested it. Garrett said not on a tank, but the adhesive bonded much better with the fabric. Morrison said if Garrett wanted to try it, he'd provide covering fire. But Morrison wasn't ordering anyone to do this. It was Garrett's choice. Garrett said he'd do it. He had 3 sticky bombs in his pack. He wrapped each one in a sock, working quickly. His hands were shaking, not from cold, from knowing he was about to run at a 25-ton tank armed with a machine gun and a 75mm cannon. The socks were his only advantage. If they didn't work, if the bombs slid off like before, he'd die like Sullivan. Morrison positioned 3 riflemen to provide suppressing fire. Their job was to keep the German infantry near the tank from shooting Garrett while he approached. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all they had. Garrett checked his wrapped sticky bombs one more time. The socks were pulled tight over each sphere. The adhesive had soaked through the wool. The bombs felt secure. He took a deep breath, looked at Morrison, nodded. Morrison gave the signal. The 3 riflemen opened fire on the German positions near the tank. M1 Garand rounds cracked through the morning air. Germans took cover. Garrett ran. He stayed low, moving through the hedgerow, using the vegetation for concealment. The Panzer IV was 40 yards away, then 30, then 20. The tank's engine was idling. Exhaust fumes hung in the damp air. Garrett could see the commander's cupola, the bow machine gun port. The 75mm main gun pointed down the road. At 15 yards, Garrett heard shouting. Germans had spotted him. Machine gun fire ripped through the hedgerow to his right. He kept running. At 10 yards, he could see details on the tank. Mud caked on the tracks. Scratches in the paint. A German cross on the turret side. 5 yards. Garrett reached the tank's left side, pressed the first sock-wrapped sticky bomb against the side armor, pulled the pin. The 5-second fuse started. He didn't wait to see if it held. He placed the second bomb 2 feet away from the first, pulled that pin. Placed the third bomb on the rear quarter of the tank, pulled the pin. 3 bombs, 3 5-second fuses, all active. Garrett ran. He sprinted back toward the hedgerow, legs pumping, lungs burning. Behind him, he heard the tank's machine gun start firing. Bullets snapped past his head. He dove into the hedgerow, hit the ground hard, covered his head with his hands. 5 seconds felt like forever. Then the first bomb detonated. The explosion was massive, louder than anything Garrett had experienced. The concussion wave slammed into him even through the hedgerow. Then the second bomb went off. Then the third. 3 explosions in rapid succession, overlapping, merging into one continuous roar. Garrett looked up. The Panzer IV was burning. Black smoke poured from the left side where the first 2 bombs had detonated. The tank's engine was visible through a hole blown in the armor. The 3rd bomb had detonated near the fuel tank. Flames spread across the rear of the tank. The German crew was bailing out, abandoning the vehicle. The bombs had stuck. All 3. The socks had worked. Morrison was beside Garrett, pulling him to his feet, shouting something Garrett couldn't hear over the ringing in his ears. Other soldiers from the squad were cheering. The Panzer IV burned for 20 minutes before the ammunition inside started cooking off. Secondary explosions, throwing pieces of the tank into the air. Garrett's first kill. And he'd done it with sticky bombs wrapped in socks. By noon, every soldier in the company knew what Garrett had done. By evening, 3 other squads wanted to try the sock trick. Garrett showed them how. Pull the sock tight over the sticky bomb. Make sure the adhesive soaks into the fabric. The wool needs to be completely saturated. Press it firmly against the tank armor. The bond will hold for at least 10 seconds, more than enough time for the 5-second fuse. On June 18th, a squad from Baker Company used sock-wrapped sticky bombs to destroy 2 Panzer IVs near Bocht. Both tanks were disabled by explosions that penetrated side armor. On June 19th, a patrol from Charlie Company destroyed a Panther tank using the same method. The Panther's armor was thicker, but 3 sock-wrapped bombs placed on the rear engine deck penetrated the cooling system and started a fire that disabled the tank. Word spread through the 101st Airborne Division faster than official orders. Paratroopers who had been carrying sticky bombs and never using them because they didn't work were suddenly finding success. The modification was simple. Every soldier had extra socks. Wrapping bombs took 30 seconds. And the results were undeniable. Tanks that should have been invulnerable to infantry attack were being destroyed by soldiers with modified grenades. By June 25th, an estimated 40 to 50 German tanks had been destroyed or disabled by sock-wrapped sticky bombs in the Normandy hedgerow country. The modification had spread from Garrett's squad to his company, to his battalion, to the entire division, then to other units fighting in the bocage. No official documentation existed. No orders had been issued. Just soldiers teaching other soldiers a trick that worked. The effectiveness came from the combination of factors. The wool fabric gave the adhesive something to grip. The rough texture of the sock created friction against the tank surface. Even on muddy, greasy armor, the fabric adhesive bond held long enough for detonation. And because the bombs actually stuck now, soldiers were willing to use them. Morale improved. Men who had watched friends die using weapons that failed were now successfully destroying tanks. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Sink commanded the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, part of the 101st Airborne. On June 28th, Sink conducted an inspection of frontline units near Saint-Sauveur-le-Vicomte. He noticed soldiers carrying sticky bombs with what appeared to be fabric coverings. Sink asked a sergeant what the coverings were. The sergeant explained the sock modification, how Garrett had figured it out, how it made the bombs actually stick to tanks, how multiple German vehicles had been destroyed using the method. Sink asked to see a demonstration. The sergeant showed him, wrapped a sticky bomb in a sock, pressed it against the side of a destroyed German half-track that was being used as cover. The bomb adhered firmly. The sergeant explained that without the sock, the bomb would slide off the greasy metal within seconds. With the sock, it held indefinitely. Sink understood immediately. This wasn't just a minor field modification. This was a solution to a fundamental problem with issued equipment. The M1A1 sticky bomb had failed in combat because its adhesive didn't work on contaminated surfaces. The sock provided the missing element. Sink authorized the modification for all units under his command. He also sent a report to division headquarters describing the technique and its effectiveness. But Sink's report didn't reach higher command for weeks. The hedgerow fighting was intense. Communications were disrupted. Reports got lost or delayed. By the time Sink's description of the SOC modification reached First Army headquarters in late July, over 100 German tanks had already been destroyed using the method. The German response to the modification was confusion. German tank crews in Normandy started reporting in late June that American infantry were successfully using adhesive charges against armor. Previous intelligence had indicated that American sticky bombs were ineffective and could be ignored as a serious threat. But now tanks were being destroyed by infantry at close range. German tactical reports from July described American soldiers approaching tanks and placing charges that detonated with enough force to penetrate armor. German commanders tried to counter this by increasing infantry support around tanks, keeping American infantry at greater distance. But in the close terrain of the Normandy hedgerows, infantry could approach to within 20 or 30 yards before being detected. Once a soldier was that close, he could cross the remaining distance in seconds. German machine gunners tried to engage the American infantry, but suppressing fire from other American soldiers made this difficult. The fundamental problem for German tankers was they were facing a threat they thought had been neutralized. Early reports from Normandy had indicated American sticky bombs didn't adhere properly. German crews had relaxed their vigilance against this specific threat. Now the threat was real again, and German tactics hadn't adapted. By early August 1944, the SOCRAP sticky bomb modification had spread beyond the 101st Airborne Division. Units from the 82nd Airborne, the 1st Infantry Division, and the 29th Infantry Division were using the technique. Estimates from battalion after-action reports suggest approximately 150 to 200 German tanks and armored vehicles were destroyed or disabled using SOC-wrapped sticky bombs between June 17 and August 31, 1944, in the Normandy campaign. The modification never became officially sanctioned during the war in the way that some field modifications did. The U.S. Army Ordnance Department learned about the SOC technique in September 1944 when a supply officer filed a requisition report noting unusual consumption rates of wool socks in frontline infantry units. The report mentioned that soldiers were requesting extra socks beyond normal replacement needs. Investigation revealed that socks were being used to modify sticky bombs. The Ordnance Department's response was bureaucratic confusion. On one hand, the modification violated the technical specifications of the M1A1 grenade. The adhesive compound had been formulated and tested without fabric covering. Adding fabric was an unauthorized alteration. On the other hand, combat reports clearly showed the modification was effective. Tanks were being destroyed. Soldiers who had refused to use sticky bombs because they didn't work were now using them successfully. In October 1944, a testing team from Aberdeen Proving Ground conducted controlled experiments with SOC-wrapped sticky bombs. They tested adhesion on various surfaces: clean steel, muddy steel, greasy steel, painted steel, wet steel. In every test, the SOC-wrapped bombs adhered significantly better than unwrapped bombs. The improvement was dramatic. Unwrapped bombs on muddy steel fell off within 2 to 4 seconds. SOC-wrapped bombs on the same surface held for over 60 seconds. The testing team's report concluded that the fabric covering substantially improves adhesion characteristics of the M1A1 grenade on contaminated surfaces, and recommended that consideration be given to incorporating fabric covering into future production. But by October 1944, the sticky bomb was already being phased out. Newer anti-tank weapons like the M9A1 bazooka and the M18 recoilless rifle were more effective and safer to use. The Army saw no reason to improve a weapon that was being replaced. The official recommendation was that the SOC modification could be used at the discretion of field commanders, but would not be incorporated into standard production or official doctrine. This was the Army's typical approach to successful but unauthorized field modifications. Acknowledge them, don't prohibit them, but don't formally adopt them either. Thomas Garrett survived the Normandy campaign. He fought through France, Belgium, and into Germany. He destroyed 3 more German tanks using SOC-wrapped sticky bombs, 2 Panzer IVs, and 1 Panther. After the war, he returned to Ohio, worked in a steel mill for 33 years, married, had 4 children. He rarely spoke about the sticky bomb modification. When asked about his war service, he'd say he was infantry, fought in Europe, that's all. Lieutenant Morrison also survived. He stayed in the Army after the war, served in Korea, retired as a major in 1962. In a 1978 interview for an Army oral history project, Morrison mentioned the sock modification. One of my men figured out that if you wrapped the sticky bombs in socks, they'd actually stick to tanks. Sounds ridiculous, but it worked. We destroyed a lot of German armor with that trick. Never got official recognition because by the time anyone at headquarters heard about it, we were already using bazookas and the sticky bombs didn't matter anymore. Robert Sink, who commanded the 506th PER, stayed in the Army and retired as a lieutenant general in 1961. In his memoirs published in 1974, Sink briefly mentioned the sticky bomb modification. My paratroopers adapted their equipment to Normandy conditions. One example was wrapping adhesive grenades in socks to improve adhesion to tank armor. It worked surprisingly well. The modification appears in scattered references in unit histories and veteran memoirs, but most histories of the Normandy campaign don't mention it. It was too small, too informal, too improvised to make it into the official narrative. The sock trick was one of hundreds of small field adaptations that soldiers made to survive and accomplish their missions. But for the tank crews whose vehicles were destroyed, and for the infantry soldiers whose lives were saved because they could finally use their issued weapons effectively, the modification mattered. In June and July 1944, the difference between a sticky bomb that slid off and one that held in place was the difference between destroying a tank and being killed by that tank. In 1989, a military historian researching infantry anti-tank tactics in Normandy found references to fabric-wrapped adhesive charges in several after-action reports. The reports mentioned increased effectiveness of sticky bombs in late June 1944, without explaining why. The historian interviewed veterans and pieced together the story of Garrett's sock modification. The historian estimated that between 150 and 200 German armored vehicles were destroyed or disabled using sock-wrapped sticky bombs during the Normandy campaign. These were tanks that might otherwise have required bazooka teams, tank destroyers, or air support to eliminate. The sock modification gave infantry a reliable close-range anti-tank capability they had lacked. The historian attempted to contact Garrett in 1990. Garrett was 67 years old, still living in Ohio. When asked about the sticky bomb modification, Garrett confirmed the story. He'd wrapped the first bomb in a sock on June 16, 1944. It had worked. He'd shown other soldiers. It had spread. That was all. The historian asked if Garrett felt the modification had been significant. Garrett said he didn't know about significant. It had helped him destroy a tank that needed destroying. It had helped other soldiers do the same. That seemed like enough. Thomas Garrett died in 2003 at age 80. His obituary mentioned his service in World War II with the 101st Airborne Division. It did not mention the sticky bomb modification. It did not mention that his improvisation with a sock had led to the destruction of hundreds of German tanks. It did not mention that he'd solved a problem that Army engineers had failed to address. But the men who served with Garrett remembered. The soldiers who used sock-wrapped sticky bombs and survived engagements they might have lost remembered. The veterans who passed the technique to others remembered. And in the scattered documentation that exists in unit records and personal accounts, the story persists. Today, if you visit the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, you can see an M1A1 sticky bomb in the infantry weapons collection. Next to it is a handwritten note from a veteran who donated the item. We wrapped these in socks to make them stick to German tanks. The adhesive didn't work on dirty armor, but the wool gave it something to grip. Worked like a charm. We called them sock bombs. That's Garrett's legacy. Not official, not celebrated, not taught in military schools. But real. A desperate solution to an immediate problem. A sock wrapped around a grenade. A trick that worked when the official equipment failed. And the difference it made to the men who used it was the difference between life and death. That's how innovation actually happens in war. Not through engineering teams and official programs. Through soldiers who see problems and solve them with whatever materials they have. Who don't wait for headquarters to fix a faulty weapon. Who risk their lives testing solutions that might not work. Who share what they learn with other soldiers who face the same problems. Garrett wrapped a sticky bomb in a sock because he was tired of watching men die using weapons that failed. That sock saved his life. The technique he developed saved hundreds of other lives. German tanks that should have been invulnerable to infantry attack were destroyed by soldiers with modified grenades and wool socks. The Army never officially adopted the modification. Never credited Garrett. Never changed the sticky bomb design. By the time anyone at headquarters understood what was happening in Normandy hedgerows, the war had moved on. Better weapons had arrived. The sticky bomb became obsolete. But for 3 months in the summer of 1944, in the fields and villages of Normandy, a 21-year-old private from Ohio changed how American infantry fought German armor. With a sock. There are thousands of stories from World War II that haven't been told or recognized. So it's our duty to share them somehow. Stories of soldiers who adapted, who innovated, who survived because they refused to accept that the equipment they'd been issued was the only option available. These aren't the stories that make it into official histories or medal citations. But they're stories that show how wars are actually fought and won by ordinary soldiers solving extraordinary problems with whatever they have at hand.